Hey everybody, Mike McWilliams, upstairs to the right music channel. Thank you so much for showing up to our live stream Sunday at Mike's. We made it through another week, about to start another one. But it's so good to be here with everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to do so. I always start out by saying that time is a valuable thing, and spending a little bit of yours with me is always greatly appreciated. So thank you so much for doing so. Always appreciated. Scott, how you doing, sir? Good to have you here. While we wait for more people to show up in the live stream, Mr. Watson, how you doing, sir? Welcome. While we wait for more people to show up here in the live stream, we will talk about things that went on here at Upstairs to the Right Music Channel studio this week. I had the issue, good, broke, but good. Hey, join the multitude of us. you know, I had a shipment that generally, when I bring in guitars from Japan, they generally come directly from Japan to here to the Eurozone. But for some reason, this shipment went from Japan to the States, to Indianapolis, and then to here. It was the weirdest thing. And I was talking about this in my last live stream on Wednesday, that I was seeking to resolve that, figure that out, what was going on with that. It did work out, and the shipment did arrive. Oddest thing, though, I have no idea why you would make that kind of detour, but it did show up. And as a result of that, I'd like to talk about a little bit here while we wait for people to show up. I like to show off one of the guitars that I got in and talk about it a little bit here in the opening before we get to the main subject. I got in 4 guitars. All of them are pretty exceptional. Tokais and Fenders this time. 1997-ish Fender ST57. Really nice. Still amazed by the necks on those. They are Squire Affinity, levels of thinness on those Fender necks, and a Tokai Silver Star from 1983. And again, that Tokai, by, I believe it was a little bit later, maybe within that year or so, they started making the Fenders. So the necks on that Tokai Silver Star and the neck on that ST57 are pretty identical, to be frank with you. So I found that quite amazing. And the other Tokai I got in was a 1980 SG, an SG. I have to say, it's not an SG80. It looks like, seems to me it's an SG 60. Again, the numbers denoting the yen value, but it's still a nice one. Those are all made in Japan guitars. Now, as you know, I generally try to get just made in Japan guitars in, but this time around, I actually broke one of my rules, 2 of my rules actually. First rule is I don't buy any guitars that are that are after 2001. The other rule that I have is that I don't buy anything made in Korea or made in China. Those are things that I deal with. I really strictly deal with 70s and 80s, 90-ish Fender and Tokais and Grecos and things like that made in Japan. But I made an exception this time. I'd like to show this one to you guys. This, see if I can get it in there. Yeah, there we go. We'll do it like that. So this, guys, is actually a Tokai. As you can see, perfect condition, no bumps, no scratches. This is a Tokai Love Rock, the famous Tokai Love Rock model. And everybody knows that these are the Tokai Love Rocks they're still being produced to this day in China, But these are some of the really, really nice, I guess, Les Paul copies that you could get. I would say that of all time, I think there's probably some of the better ones. I could think of a few others, like some of the Epiphones were really good, but this one is really nice too. And this was made in 1998. So this is a 1998 Tokai Love Rock made in Korea. This is a Korean made. This 1998 was the first year that Tokai moved over from from Japan to Korea. And in that first year, this came out in two colors: a translucent, like a translucent red, and a translucent blue. And it's darkened over time, but it still has, it's actually starting to get a little purple depending upon it. When these translucent colors age, even in polyester, they take on a lot of depth of color over time. It's a very interesting thing, but you don't see a lot of these in blue. I found one in red, but you don't see a lot of them in blue. Now, one of the things you'll notice about this guitar is you'll see the truss rod cover is your standard two screws, um, which you would find on, of course, Gibsons and the really high quality Japanese copies, uh, because they were replicating that. But when you get into, of course, the Epiphones, it's a three screws that they use on the truss rod cover, and that's one of the ways you can differentiate between the two. In this first year run of these Korean-made Tokais, they made them identical to the way that they were making them in Japan. So really. And not a lot of them either. So it's really an interesting thing to find one of these. But it's of the batch of all those guitars, and those are some pretty awesome guitars I named off. This one is my favorite. I love playing this one. I love the way that it sounds. The pickups are the Tokai 57 Classics. It's their version of the 57 Classics. And sounds to me like they're Alnico 2 pickups. Yeah, I'd say Alnico 2 pickups. Really nice. Really great player. Excellent condition from the year 1998. So 27-year-old guitar. For 27 years old, it's in really, really great condition. Really, really great condition. So really, after that, with these guitars, they then went on to the way they with the three hole two truss rod necks, as opposed to the two pin and one truss rod necks on these, like you would find on a Gibson, and made a few other changes. But again, I don't generally buy guitars from Korea, but I saw this and I know that these are really, 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 really nice Les Paul copies. Korean made ones, the best ones. And again, I believe these were coming out of the Court factory, which was a little bit of the higher end stuff. No, is that true? Yes, I do believe that's true. There's two factories. I can't think of the other one right now, but I do believe these were being produced at the Court factory at that time. And just a really great guitar. So really happy that that showed up. It is a small miracle that these guitars arrived, especially considering they they went from Japan to the States to Europe. But okay, at least it arrived. And on the SG, I had to do a little bit of drop fill repair on that, and it came out so nice. There was a dent in the headstock. I took some acrylic black paint, um, wiped it down with mineral spirits, put the acrylic black paint on it, and then put acrylic cryolate on top of that. and then of course scrape that down, sanded it out, and you would never know that big chunk out of the headstock, dent in the headstock was there, completely gone. And so I'm getting really, really good at that. I have to be honest with you. I'm really getting good at repairing, and I know it sounds odd, but relicking as well. I'm starting to understand the art of relicking because when you do repairs like that, it's not always gonna. It'll show. You'll still see it there a little bit, but it'll stand out like it's like putting a white patch on a black surface. It'll stand out. And so what you want to do is fix it and then relic it so that it looks natural to the rest of what's going on in other places of the headstock. And for a guy who doesn't like relic guitars, I don't like to relic a perfectly brand new guitar, but if it's an old guitar that needs a repair, and when you do the repair, you relic it a little bit so that it blends in, doesn't catch the eye. It's a natural part of the age of the guitar. I think that that's a great thing, and I am really pleased that my skills in doing that kind of work is getting better. I'll show it to you guys. I'll put it up regular content, and you can check that out. But really, please tell that. So that's how I spent my weekend. Took 2 days to do that because you have to let everything dry, and then this the sanding and the scraping and all that. But if you take your time, it really comes out really great. And so very pleased with that. So great guitars this time, but I have to say this Tokai Love Rock. It's been a long time since I've had a Tokai Love Rock. There's video of me in Japan with one of these guitars, or a much earlier one, a made in Japan one from um, I believe 1980 that was, or 82, somewhere in there. But I like the necks on these Love Rocks because it's not a 58 baseball neck. It's not a 60 slim. It's actually really a true 59 profile neck on this. The most comfortable, to be honest with you, of of the Gibson necks. And this is a good one. Good one. Really, really pleased with this score on that guitar. You play Metallica? No, I do not. I listen to Metallica, but I do not play. That is not my style. My style is a little bit more heavy metal, I guess, ish, but not like that. Let's see. So there's that, guys. All right. So tonight's topic. Yeah, I generally talk about all kinds of things. Um, when it comes to, again, the metaphor of YouTube being a cafeteria, it's lunchtime. All the different genres that you find on YouTube have their own table, and our table is the gear nerds table. And Some tables in this cafeteria are larger than others, some more interesting than others. But I do believe ours is an interesting one as well because actually, when it comes to not just gear, it comes to the performing arts as well, playing that gear in front of people, um, or even just on YouTube in front of a camera. Um, it gets into the psychology sometimes when we discuss things here at this table. And tonight is going to be no different. I would like to talk about the psychological aspects of ego and the musician, the performer, the performing artist. So, two things. People can teach you two things: what to do and what not to do. And the other thing is, when I was younger, uh, really younger, and I was working at not working. I was working. I was trying to learn how to engineer and how to produce at paying for it at the studio called Right Track Studio in Santa Monica, 16-track studio. And you walk in the studio, there was a wooden plank by the door that said, "Leave your the studio has no room for ego. The studio has no room for ego." And I've thought about that. That would be right around 1982, 83-ish that I was doing that. Um, and had to be because it was Santa Monica and I was driving. So I had to be 16. So we will say 83, 84. Um, so that really stuck with me. That really stuck with me. Hey, hello, Kalu Tube. Good to have you here. Yeah, well, most musicians rude all the time. Yeah, yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to get into that. We're really going to get into that. And I hope that for everybody listening in, because it's going to ring familiar, this topic tonight, and I'll warn you, it may hit a few nerves, but it may ring true as well with a lot of people. Tonight's discussion is going to be more of a psychological analysis of being a performer. Now, I have been around, produced, and worked with countless people over time, and the ones that I love the best, working with the best, the ones that I didn't even feel like I was working were the ones that had every reason in the world to have an enormous ego, and yet they did not. They were warm. They were. I always talk about like Smokey Robinson, for example. Smokey had every reason. He was vice president of Motown while it was really super big. He has a certain legendary status of his own as a performer. And when I had the pleasure of recording him, he was super warm. And later on, when I saw him, he remembered who I was and he was warm then as well. And that had a great impact on me. Those two things, I know they don't seem like a lot, but fortunately, they occurred at an early stage in my career. Or the first one happened at an early stage in my repair. The studio has no room for your ego. I always remember that. I was actually going to put one of those up if I ever had a studio like that. I was gonna put a plaque like that in my entryway, entrance way. But the other one was guys like Smokey, and I can name a few other folks, producers that I work with, Grammy Award winning producers who took the time to sit down with me and Jock and work with us and teach us some stuff. And so that sticks with you. That kind of sticks with you. You kind of really learn that, adapt to that, and realize that it's to your benefit to be that way, or you can go the other way. I would say the ratio of people who went we'll call it the smoky route, would be about 20%. The other 80%, to various degrees, would go the unable to check their ego at the door. Some who, again, who were had every right to be, to have that ego, and some who did not at all. And I want to talk about those people, the ones who didn't at all, not even remotely. And it's compensatory grandiosity is a psychological term for somebody that I'm going to talk about tonight. And the subtext of that would be when passion becomes delusion. One of the words that is thrown around these days that irks me to no end is the word passion, because to the point where it's a non meaning, it really doesn't mean anything. You know, okay, I'm passionate about, you know, pickling. Okay, could you be a little bit more descriptive? Why do you feel so strongly about pickling? And generally people, well, I'm just passionate about it. It's my passion because it's something I'm passionate about. And I don't like that word. When it turns into delusion, it's even worse. It's even worse. Now, I didn't get this topic this week. This topic found me. I was talking to you guys on Wednesday on the last live stream that an older gentleman reached out to me that lives here in Amsterdam, um, of African Caribbean descent, and loves R&B music, things like that. Okay, I like that stuff too. I like a lot of kinds of music. Well, I want to meet you, and I'd like to discuss with you, he says, some project that I like to work on. And I said, fine. And, I talked to him a little bit, and he says, oh, Mike, I really need your help. I really need your help. And I was really just trying to help this guy because, as I told you on Wednesday night, I was like, there's some things that I feel that I could do with this guy, but his vibe was what was stopping me. It was his demeanor. And he was reminding me of people in the past that I've run into that had a similar demeanor, and it never worked out well. As a matter of fact, in some cases, it never went anywhere. And in this case, it was no different. Um, you know, he wanted me to listen to his work and get feedback, and he wanted me to he had some show that he said he was trying to put together, and he wanted me to play acoustic guitar for him for that show. And I said, as you guys know, I'm semi-retired from music. I don't even play that much, these days. But that's a separate subject. But I thought to myself, okay, I guess I could do that. So I said to him, send me 3 examples of acoustic songs. He played me 1 or 2. One I think was an acoustic version of an Angie Stone song, which I never really listened to that, but I found it pretty and interesting. It was capoed at the ninth fret, so it has a certain sound to it that I found interesting. And I said, okay, send me that one plus 2 others, and I'll sit down and I'll try to pick through it and see what I can do. And as I told you guys that night, he sent me 15 links. 15. And I wrote back to him and I said, "Hey, dude, just send me those 3 that we discussed. I'm not going to listen to this. I can't. I don't have time to listen to all this stuff. Just send me those 3 for now." And when I called him on that, which is not really calling on anybody, just saying, "Hey, you're not giving me what we discussed. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but let's have a little structure here if you want my help." And the next thing I know, I kid you not, guys, I got an iPhone, is about that big screen. It went past the screen, diatribe and Ubonics that I couldn't even read about it, basically. And then at the end of it, he was talking about, we make love because of life, you know, music is life, and just all this weird shit that I was like, what the hell? And then he ended that by saying, and I quote, I am music. I'll let that sink in. And of course, needless to say, I'll be having nothing to do with this guy. But I thought that I would discuss because it's been a while since I run into this type of character, and I thought maybe we could do a little bit of a PSA tonight, yeah, a public service announcement tonight, if you will, on what to look out for if you're a musician, especially if you're young, or if you're older. And I talk about reaching out and working with people, but you only want to work with people who have the ability to have structure in their lives. If they've never had any structure in their lives, or any semblance of that, then certainly as they get older, that's not going to improve. And it usually starts when they're young. If they have no structure when they're younger, believe me, they're not going to have any when they're older. It's just a fact of life. And, and by the way, I spent 40 years in the music business as a professional. I've done the whole grind. I've done recording, producing, touring, the whole grind, the whole grind. And I've met people who were sure passionate about what we did, but I never met anyone who is music. And I certainly don't see a guy who never performed music, can play an instrument, can rudimentarily sing. I'll give him that at best, but it's very weak because he's old. He's 67 years old. He's not going to be belting them out like Luther Vandross, I'll tell you that much. And I would never say that about myself. I would never sit here and say to you guys, I am music. I am music. Because of a few things. First of all, it's an outlandish thing to say. Anybody who makes I am statements, by the way, you want to flee from, or I will. I am and I will. You might make statements like that is not coming from a good place. Trust me on that one. The second thing is it's so disrespectful to ask somebody for their help and then to turn around and say something to that person as if their experience, which doesn't matter either, because again, leave your ego at the door, but it does help. It's the experience that I had is what he wanted. It was a thing of value. And to downplay, to say that to somebody like me, I wouldn't walk up when Smokey I was recording Smokey Robinson. I didn't stop in the middle and say, by the way, Smokey, 5 seconds, just 5 seconds. I'm a better singer than you, or I am music. Okay, we can keep going. No sane person would ever say anything like that, first of all. And second of all, it's an outlandish thing to say that nobody would say. You know, Prince and Michael Jackson, they never said that, you know. You know, old Quincy never said that. I can go through the list of artists who haven't who could qualify. Joni's never said that, and she could, you know. Again, it's not something that people say, so that's a red flag. That's red flag number one. Michael Watson says, "Damn man, I would be out fast." Anthony says, "I am music is a crazy thing to declare about oneself." Aha. I feel like only Stevie Wonder, there's another one who could say something like that, but you never heard Stevie Wonder say that. And Prince could get away with something like that. But still, even if they said that, people were like, yeah, okay, but still, it's a little bit, declarative. And yet they would never say something like that. Right. So so why would somebody say something like that? So I thought instead of being a complete waste of my time, it was only a couple of hours. I went to his place for a couple of hours and yeah, came home, did the live stream, got off the live stream and read that text. And I was like, oh no, delete. No, no. Uh, so it wasn't a lot of time, but it immediately, my mother's a doctor of psychology. And I read a lot of her books when I could because I found it interesting. I didn't really study it in university, but I found it interesting and still do. As you guys know, I talk about the psychology of sales, of consumerism a lot. Tonight, I'm going to talk about the psychology of frail ego. You know, let's get to the clinical definitions first and get that out of the way. Um, Compensatory grandiosity is when someone inflates their sense of importance to hide insecurity or failure. Now, I don't even think Ozzy would say something like that. Ozzy wouldn't say something like that. No, 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 no. These guys don't. You don't have because I'll show you why they wouldn't say why these guys wouldn't say that. It's an ego defensive mechanism, a patch over hole that's never really been healed. People that make statements like that have issues in their backgrounds from their childhood, either through parenting or lack of parenting, through how well or well not, or how well or well they didn't do in school, their economic status, certainly later on in life, a lot of things. Whether or not they feel as though they achieved something in their life, whether or not they feel that as they get older or when they're even younger, are they really good enough to be there? Are they good enough to be there? Um, Yngwie Marstein? Nah. Sure, he has a huge ego. Even as big as a ego as Marstein has, he wouldn't say something like I just because if you would read about it or you would see it or he would say it, and none of those guys have said that in print. That would be like page one of guitar.com. None of these guys ever said that. I've never heard anybody say that was serious. Um, so they really can't accept the reality of their situation. And this guy is 67. He was a pop lock dancer back in the 80s. And now all of a sudden he's done nothing since and of any note at all. And he's getting older and he's starting to feel that I need to to be somebody because I'm around people who are successful and I realize that I'm not to their level, so I need to inflate myself in order through my spoken words, what we call a mile wide and an inch deep. It's confusing bravado with depth is basically what that is. And you'll see this with singers. I've seen it with female singers. I've seen it with musicians. Um, there was this keyboardist in Nagoya that was the next replacing band that was coming in to replace our band. And I'm up on stage and I'm performing, and this jackass, I don't even know this guy. He jumps up on the stage in the middle of the set and he starts like miming, playing the keyboards while we're playing. I think we were playing Rock with You or something like that, with Michael Jackson. And and I walked off the stage and I sat down with the manager of the club. um, a Japanese guy, and I said to him, you know, I don't even know what to do with this. And he said, I'll straighten him out. And I never saw that guy again. which I really think was not a good thing because these guys were Yakuza who really ran that club. But just that kind of jackassery, you know. Um, I don't know what he thought he was doing, but you see it all the time, you know, guys that are, just they're more show than they are, they're more tell than they are show, I guess is a way of actually saying that. Ben Omar, I'm gonna rewind this and watch it from the start, but I wanted to pop in and say hi everyone. Hey Ben, how you doing? Good to have you here. You Henry? No, I'm hoping you're not talking about Henry the serial killer. Um, they can't accept the reality of their situation, so they rewrite it. They're not achieving, they're not underachieving, they're just misunderstood. They're not unprepared, they're just too creative for structure. I don't have time to, I gotta, it's, we got to throw this in. We got to listen to all this, and we got to have complete chaos because my whole life has been chaos, and that's the only structure that I'm able to work in. But the problem is that most people abhor chaos, or at least you should. And any professional is going to absolutely not even deal with chaos. So you see that all the time. The world isn't ready for my art. Is that and what and then it was funny. I was in his house. He was describing another guy who he was working with that he says, but he doesn't work with anymore. And why? And this is, by the way, guys, this is again a 67-year-old man. You know, he says, well, he's just jealous of me. First of all, I always considered any male man who used the word jealous, I always would find that a little sus. I'm sorry, I just do. Maybe it's because of my age, maybe because I'm older, but any guy who goes around saying somebody's jealous of them, that's a little sus for me, just the way it is. The second thing is saying that someone is jealous for you is the battle cry of the narcissist because it paints them as both the victim and the hero at the same time without any accountability in order to give any kind of truth to that. And so that's not confidence. That's fear dressed up in some cases leather pants that I've seen. I remember a guitarist that was again a good example in the studio. It's like, you know, I need you to play 8 bars. I'm going to give you at least the opportunity to play whatever you want, but I don't want any. This song does not require that style of playing. I need a little less Eddie Hazel and a little bit more. I don't know, Steve Lukather, you know. But well, this is what I'm feeling for this track right now. Well, I'm feeling your ass out the door, and I threw him out, and I played it myself, which is you know which is what I should have done in the first place. But again, there was no room for this. He probably went out and told his friends that I was jealous of his playing after that. It's a red flag, guys. It's a red flag. Now, I will admit, in the performance art, um, let me check the live stream here before I move on. Ben says, I almost forgot. I came across a newer, I think, band. They were playing a live gig in Romania. The Zach Schultz Gang. Write it down and check it out, friends. Well, we're not going to write it down. We're going to highlight it. And we're going to going to source that? And we will take it. Yeah, got it right here. UK Blues Trio. They're an electrifying blues rock trio built on the playing frontman Zach. All right, I will check them out. Thank you very much, Ben. We always like new music here, and if you think it's good, we really like that because we're really here to hear good new music as well as old good stuff. Thank you for pointing that out. In the performance art, music, acting, dance, YouTube, uh, ego is part of the deal. You need some ego to even get on stage, whatever it is. You need some. You need some. But because otherwise you would never survive it. You wouldn't. You get torn, you would get ripped to shreds by other people and their dominance. You have to say, hey, I got enough ego to know that I deserve to be here, but don't come over here, effing with me with yours. We're not going to play that game. Or I'm not going to F you with you in mine either. We're all just going to sit here. Hey, we're here. There's a reason we're here. Let's get on with it. So that's where you really want to be. The trap is when you start performing your identity instead of expressing your art. What does that mean? When you perform your identity, those are the guys that you meet who are always on. They're always loud. Their clothes, their hair are always big giveaways, always something funky going on there. Or their just overall demeanor. And they think that, people are looking at them, because they're energetic, but people are looking at them because they're jackass, you know. And sometimes the joker or the court jester can be amusing. But what happened to the court jester when the king no longer found him amusing? It's the same thing with people. And when you start performing your identity instead of expressing your art, then you're in trouble. You're in trouble. It's when you stop being a person and you start becoming a brand is the best way to express that. You stop becoming a person, you start becoming a brand, you know, even in private, you can't turn it off. I've met cats like that. They were always that character in the studio. Um, and it's creepy as all get out sometimes. It comes across that way. Or just really irritating as well. It's exhausting, is what it is. And they can't take feedback. You can't collaborate with them. And worst of all, they can't improve. Because if you can't take feedback and you can't take structure, then you can't improve. See, feedback improves is part of your improvement process because it's having not too frail of an ego that you can accept criticism or not even criticism. Because in the case of this guy, when I said send me 3 tracks and he sent me 15, that's and what he and I balked at that. What he objected to was having structure put upon him. Well, I feel as though you need to hear more than 3 in order to understand my art. They're like, dude, you're just playing me other people's tracks. None of this stuff is yours. You didn't play it. You didn't write it. You could, it's like, what are you talking about? You're sending me a bunch of links. It's insane. It's insane. It's super insane. You know, because improvement requires admitting that there's room to grow. And their frail egos can't handle that. They can't take it. I'm sure you guys have seen this. Artists who can't be critiqued. Maybe you've worked with one. I've worked with a few of them, and they were very short. I learned at a very young age. The studio has no room for ego. You either want to do the work because you want to do the work. The other thing is that needing to be on stage in order to be validated off stage. If you don't feel validated off stage, then being on stage is not going to do that. It's not going to help you. Not going to help you. That's the trap of a performance. That happens to actors a lot. Actors, they get on, they have very shaky personal lives. They get on stage, they get public adoration, and it becomes this juxtaposition. Well, everybody loves me, but in my private life, I'm a mess, you know, and sometimes it just gets to be too much. Or to escape uh, their lives, they'll really get into a character, and that going into that character along with not having a firm hold of who you are can be destructive as well. Like Heath Ledger is the example that I'm thinking of. He should have been happy with you helping him and agreeing to listen to three. Well, yeah, again, Michael, this is the thing. He comes to me and he says he wants my help, and then when it got real, see, he doesn't really want the help. He doesn't really want to do it. He just wants to pretend and show somebody. I don't know who, but he wants to show somebody, oh, I'm doing something. But when it gets time to really do the work, okay, this is what we need to do, and you need to do this and do this, because he's never had structure. I can tell, I can read him from a mile away, structure his entire life. He even told me himself, I drifted around from here to there, you know, when I was younger, here in Amsterdam, the worst place that you want to drift around. And really, really seriously, like New York, don't want to do that. And he's 67 years old. He's woke up to the fact that that's all he did his whole life, and has no structure. And since nobody ever put any structure on him at all, then he fails miserably in just being a decent person, and accepting the help. Like, he can't see that. He doesn't see it that way. And there's so many people like that I've run into. And the MO is always, 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 always the same. So here's our cautionary tale for the evening. You know, I'm using this guy as an example because he's a great example. You know, you know, again, with people like this, it's not about the craft, it's not about the work. It's about filling a void, and feeling that being on stage will fill that void. But again, if you it's to me, it's almost like the singer who gets the Grammy for song of the year that she or he didn't write. That's gotta, kind of mess with your mind a little bit as well. You didn't do the work in terms of that aspect. Okay, but even in this case, he didn't even do the singing. It's like getting up on stage and getting Grammy for Song of the Year, and you didn't write it, produce it, or perform it, or sing on it. But you feel somehow or another that's going to give you validation. You hear how insane that sounds, yet that is that type of mentality. That is that type of mentality. People like that want you to do all the work. I even yeah, there's a category of people like that who would try to use you to do all the work. But again, um, at some point, they do have to step in and try to get involved somehow. And I don't even think that this individual I ran into this week has the ability to do that, because again, like I said, he wants to talk about well, I'm doing with this, but I couldn't work with him. He's jealous of me. It's just an excuse, it's deflection not to do the actual work, you know. To him, correction equals rejection. He because of a poor upbringing is all that I can say, in my opinion, from my standpoint. You know, every time he got correction, he viewed that as being rejection. To the point now in his old age, he cannot take any correction whatsoever. You know, and so when he wrote me that I am music diatribe, he wasn't defending his work. He was defending the only fragile version of himself that he has left. And I know it's hard to understand this. Again, this is a psychological analysis of ego tonight in the performing artist. And for those of us who are pretty set in our id, in our ego, firm in it, it gets a little shaky sometimes. We have self doubts. Everybody has self doubts, you know. And I have actually been on the end where my ego, got out of control once myself. I still think about it. I regret it. I regret it. You know, I I let my disdain for musicians come out during a band rehearsal once. You know, and I regret it. um, because I had to stop, sit down, and say, "This is how you do this," and this is how you play this, and and I ended all saying, "What's wrong with you? Aren't you musicians?" Which is a very harsh thing to say, and to this day, I'm sorry that I said that. And that was one time that my ego, went up, but I generally won't. I check myself. I'll check myself. And what I really needed in that situation was somebody there who wasn't on the payroll that could have checked me, because everybody was getting paid by me. There was nobody there to check me. See, that's another thing too that can happen. And therefore you really have to be self-aware. I really love music, but it's hard to maintain student life in music. Like, yeah, it's a balance. But look at what you're doing, though. You have structure in your life. And because you have structure in one aspect of your life, your studies, you have structure in the other aspect of your life, your music performance. See, all of these things require structure. And when you're young, you say, "Oh, well, I don't want to go to school. Or I have to go. I don't, why am I here?" But what school is doing for you, what education is doing for you, one of the greatest things that you can get out of it is structure. And not only that, but it'll because structure to study, and produce papers and to be able to articulate something that you took in. That requires structure. And music is nothing but structure. I don't know why people think it's just, hey, dude, let's just play, rip some chords and go for it. No, it requires structure, organization. We're going to do this. We need to do this. Okay, we need to rehearse this. We have this, and there's structure. We need to the lighting needs to be. There's just so many aspects. What board are we working on today? What do just, oh my God, there's just so many aspects of it that that they're so rich. And that's the other thing too, is that don't come to me, you know, saying I am music when you know nothing of these things. And because you know nothing of it, you're coming to somebody who doesn't make those kind of statements. That's it's outlandish to me. It's outlandish. It's insanity. It's insanity. How should I get through with that? I want to chase my dream, but I don't want to disappoint my parents. Well, you're not. You can do both at the same time. You know, the structure of education and up until a certain age, and you can determine that, but no less than 18. Anything after that is really where you have to make a decision, probably where you're at. But you can do both. I went to Cal State Northridge. I was doing music and met Jock Richmond, my good long time music collaborator. We're doing music in school. You can do both. It's not one or the other. It's not chicken and the egg situation. You can do them both. I did them both. And then you got a diploma in your hand and you got some music experience in your hand. And then it's up to you. At that point, disappointing parents is if you go out and you murder 50,000 people, in cold blood. That's disappointing to parents. Making choices in your life that at least are, positive choices are something that you should not be afraid to do, or anything that they would be disappointed in either, you know. And chasing dreams, if I didn't chase my dreams, to be frank with you, I wouldn't be sitting here in Amsterdam doing this live stream. So again, with balance, with structure too. I didn't get here without having structure in my life as well. So I'm glad that you are here because this message again is for younger folks. It's for all of us. But it's just again just a bit of the red the red flags that you want to look out for when you're doing music. And you're going to run into people in music that are going to have these psychological attributes, and you want to be aware of them immediately because there is no hope. Oh, maybe I could try to help this person. Maybe, no. Cut ties, cut bait, you know, and run. Passion, if we're going to use that word correctly, is a hunger. It's another, you never hear me say I'm hunger. I have a hunger for composing music. I like that better than passionate. Passion, Italian rooted word, again, almost sounds it has a romantic overtone to it. I'm hungry, means I'm hungry. That hunger, that drive. You know, and if you have that hunger, then you're learning and you're adapting. Hunger learns and adapts, or passion. Passion learns and adapts. Either word. Delusion is defensive. It refuses to listen. A true hungry person, they're willing to adapt and listen. A delusional person, not at all. When someone declares, I am music, that's not devotion, that's fear of being ordinary without doing any work. That's insecurity wrapped in mysticism. It's a mile wide and an inch deep. It's not even that. I can't even give that. It's 2 inches wide and a millimeter deep. Real creators don't need to claim the title. You don't have to walk in and say, I did this, and I work with this, and I did that. Let's just sit down and play. You're playing. Your, shows it. Your work that you've done before that you can play shows it. You never heard Joni Mitchell say, I am music. You never heard Jeff Beck say it either. He just played. She just played. And everybody else said it for them. See, that's the real end of this. If people say it for you. We all here had a list of folks: Prince, Stevie Wonder, Jeff Beck, Joni Mitchell, Yngwie Malmsteen, all these cats. They never said it, but we've said it for them sometimes. Boy, that guy really has music flowing through him. Or that guy really is musical. Or that real guy really has the gift. We've said that. See, the audience says that. Do you understand the difference? You don't say it. If you're doing it, your audience will say it back to you. I'm just saying. You know. So, what's the point of all this? It's not to mock. Maybe just a little bit. Maybe just a little for wasting my time. It's really to remind us that unchecked ego is artistic poison. Get a tattoo of it, put it on your arm. Unchecked ego is artistic poison. I remember I was in the studio. Now, I've told this story, I think, before. Jock and I went in, dropped in on this session for this R&B singer called Jackie McGee. She was known. Her claim to fame at that time was a top 10 R&B hit with a guy named Keith Sweat. It was a song called "Make It Last Forever," produced by Teddy Riley. And she got her deal with MCA in order to come out because that was such a hit. She got her deal in order to come out with her record. And we were asked to drop in on the session. These two young guys, these brothers, were in there working. And boy, we walked in and she was laying into them. You all blanketies, blankety, blankety, blank, and this blank, 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 and I'm blank, 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 blank. And me and Jock looked at each other and just said, thank God we didn't take on this project because this is not gonna work. This is and by the way, her album went nowhere. There was no of any significance out of it. And I don't believe there was a follow-up album. You know, that unchecked ego ended up being artistic poison for her, in an odd way. They just can't help themselves. And when your self-worth depends upon being seen, you'll do anything for attention, you dancing monkeys. You'll do anything for attention. And that's when passion dies because you're no longer making music, you're making noise, verbal diarrhea, you know? And I've been there. I've been there. I've been that unchecked ego. Like I said, I gave you a good example, but I hated it afterwards. I felt bad about it. And I think that's a difference between being a decent human being and not. Is, do you feel bad about it afterwards and do you apologize? You know, you hear somebody better than you and it'll humble you real fast. Or if you have no humility at all, it'll fly right by you. You know, real humility is having a humble heart, being humble. And that's what keeps you honest. It really is. The moral is simple: don't be that guy or that girl. Don't be them. Don't be them. We all have moments of inflated ego, and that's fine. We're human. You know, I'm only human. Good song. But if you start believing your own press, it's over. And the next time anybody walks up to you and says something like, I am music, yeah, I didn't even reply to this guy. I read that, I saw that, and I just immediately I'm not going to reply. But if I did have a reply, my reply would be, well, I'm Brent. you know, in other words, you know, one of those gets paid. The other one ends up ranting on, Instagram or Facebook about, about how everybody's jealous of them. I'm music. Well, I'm Rent. Nice to meet you. um, yeah. So let's take a minute and say a rip to Ace Frehley. And also to Limp Bizkit's bassist as well, passed away yesterday. Ace Frehley really is the reason why so many guys picked up guitar. It's amazing to me that Ace Frehley was really inspiration for a lot of cats that pick up guitar. And he doesn't get credit for that. He kind of gets, he got kind of got shuffled away there in my end in terms of that level of respect that he should have gotten. And I think the tributes that came out for him and the people who were saying, "Hey, he was the reason I picked up. Hey, he was the reason I picked up guitar. Hey, he was the reason I picked up guitar," over and over again, with some pretty, established cats, will let you know how truly influential and loved he was. You know. Thanks, man. You are a great advisor. No, no, I'm just speaking from experience, and I hope that it helps. Like the Ramones song, "Why Does Everyone Have Poison Heart?" Yeah, dig the good example, Scott. Freely was a character. Ace was a character. He was a character, but he could keep it together enough to have structure. It's when he couldn't keep together is when he kind of fell apart. But at least he had structure at one point that he could fall out of. If you never had structure at all ever, then there's nothing to fall out of. But because he had structure, he was able to get to where he got. Fell out because of drugs, the standard story, but it happens. And because he had structure, he was able to get it back together there at the end. Yeah, Sam Rivers passed away. Again, just a phenomenal player. I mean, you can't listen to Limp Bizkit and not hear that bass. I told you the bass and the bassist and the drummer are really key to a good rhythm section, and that's a driving force. And so yeah, um, so Ace and Sam have passed on. They were phenomenal musicians that will always be deeply respected because they did work. They did work. If you want to be respected even a little bit, do some work. you know, and don't expect to get respected for it. I think about Mozart. I imagine him as they lower his body into that commoner's grave. A commoner's grave, an unmarked grave. A commoner's grave was a grave that whoever died that day and needed to be buried, they all went in that hole. And Mozart, who was music, body was lowered in that grave, that unmarked grave. And today, they play his music down here at the Symphony Hall. So, not just this one, but all over the world. And that's where he was at when he passed away at 36. Don't, it's insulting. It's outrageous to me. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. I think you guys can get a sense of how I feel about it. I can't do it because there've been too many great people. We just had two pass away this week who put in the work. They got recognized while they were alive, but they're great people we know about now. Believe me, while they were living, things weren't so great, you know? So do the work, guys. Do the work. And don't worry about everything else. Scott says, Mo who? Mozart? Yeah, Mo, the Zarts, they lived over on Hampton. There was Ben Zart, there's Mike Zart, and then there was Mozart. The Mozart boys. you know, it's just amazing to me. You know, you know, uh, just amazing. All right, guys. I think that's enough for tonight. I think we beat that horse to death. We've done a cautionary tale here, and I think we all have really benefited from it. Thank you so much, everybody, showing up and listening to the Sunday Night Mike's live stream. Got some stuff coming up this week. The shipment came in, and I had some Lutheran work to do, so I didn't film things Friday, Saturday, Sunday like I normally do, but I will tomorrow for sure. So thank you guys so much for showing up. Thank you for taking the time to tune in. Hope to see you again on the Wednesday night hump. You guys take care. Bye bye.